Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Behind the Frames. I'm your host, Jorge Edwards. And this week, we're going to be covering the NFC North and comparing the players there to their ADP. But before we get into that, let me welcome Nate Markham. Nate, how are you doing today?
Doing good. Jorge, I know it's football, but you got baseball starting tomorrow.
Opening day tomorrow, Nats and Yankees, if memory serves me correctly.
So excited.
And Todd, you're sharing the baseball theme as well with your baseball cap. Todd Barnes, everybody.
Yeah, not.
I jinxed him.
But I threw a baseball hat on. But I'm definitely ready for some Garrett Cole and Max Scherzer tomorrow.
There you go.
It feels like Christmas Day, but I'm also ready to talk some football tonight.
Sounds good. And speaking of football, so we are the live streaming show for fantasyandframes.com. Head over to fantasyandframes.com today. You know, we've had a lot of content drop recently, most recently in terms of podcast form. Our podcast Fourth in Frames released their latest episode where we're talking about the NFC East. We had special guest Michael Bauer of the Dynasty Rewind podcast join us. We talked about redraft candidates, dynasty candidates on both offense and on defense from an IDP perspective. So definitely head over to Spotify, Apple, Google, wherever you listen to your podcast. Download that podcast episode and listen today. One of our writers, Jeremy Noble, he just finished up his last Boring Players article series. Basically, folks, we're going division by division and telling you all of the best sleeper candidates you can pick in your upcoming fantasy football drafts this year. Nate, Mr. Markham, you just finished your first IDP Impact series covering all of the AFC teams. We're talking about every single team in the AFC, looking at IDP options from the must-have players to the sleeper choices. And Todd, you've been doing such great work looking at receiver work. You had your slot report series going on for the past month and a half, and now you're tackling the best receiving options out of the backfield. That's dropping tomorrow, Thursday. So we're looking forward to that. All you watching should definitely check it out. And with that, you know, let's get into some news, shall we? Let's start with this one. How about that one? 4-Eye Championships, all of our drafts are in progress. Nate, you're Hank Hill. Your division is done drafting, correct?
Yeah, we are done. We're first in drafting, and we'll be first in overall standings. I'm confident in that. And I do want to give a shout out. Aaron Pags can't be with us tonight, but I know he would say it's a great night to say Fantasy Football Lives live, but it doesn't have the same ring. I like when he does it, man. I missed it.
He just commented on the stream, so let me just read what he just said. It's a beautiful night to say Fantasy Football Lives. Hashtag Tina's. He is, of course, the commissioner of the Tina Belcher division. So everybody who's in the Tina Belcher division, you know, let's wish Aaron a speedy recovery. Hope he feels better soon. Todd, you and I are in the Meg Griffin division. We had a slow day. It was a slow day. I'm not going to lie. I won't get into it, but we had a slow day. But other than that, everybody were having a good time over there. And, of course, Ken, he is the commissioner of the Hans Moleman division. They're doing well over there. So thank you to everybody who's participating in the 4-Eye Championships. You know, again, it's for a great charitable cause, and we're looking forward to, you know, getting the season going. But as far as other relevant fantasy news,
breaking news also before that is that the Barbie division in the Scott Fishbowl, it's not going to be across the ticker for everybody, set a new Scott Fishbowl record today. Applause for everyone involved. The slowest draft in the history of the Scott Fishbowl League. It was not by minutes, not by hours, by days.
Wow.
Days, folks, to the point where Scott actually booted a person, had to almost boot another person out. I mean, you get invited into the tournament of tournaments, the League of Leagues, and you don't even pay attention. So shame on them. That's it. Move on to the next topic.
Nate, being in the Barbie division, I sympathize for you, my friend.
Thank you.
Okay, let's get into some relevant fantasy news real quick. Antonio Brown retires, sure, and Devonta Freeman continues to hold the fantasy football world hostage. What do I mean by that? Well, basically, everywhere you have a potential running back that you're targeting in your drafts this year that has the potential to be in a committee, that's where Devonta Freeman is rumored to be going, whether it's Philadelphia, upsetting all the people who have tons of shares of Miles Sanders, whether it's San Francisco reuniting with Kyle Shanahan, just throwing the Raheem Mostert truthers and the Tevin Coleman truthers, however few may they be, into a huge panic. You know, you name the location, he's rumored to go there. So just sit tight. Nothing I can really say to you, regardless of where he goes. It's going to be a committee. Don't waste your time. Don't waste your draft pick. Find other players. Find some wide receivers that offer good half PPR upside. And draft your running backs early this year, folks. That's all I can really say about that. And you know what, gentlemen, let's just, if nobody else has something else to bring up, let's just get right into it. What we're here to talk about. We're not here to waste your time. We're just ready to get to some content. Let's talk about some NFC North fantasy football relevant players and compare them to their ADP and tell you, you know what, they're worth the investment of where they're at in terms of their ADP. Or maybe, you know what, we like the people that are around them better. Don't invest in them. So let's get started with quarterbacks. Nate, you're covering quarterbacks in this division. Mm-hmm. Compared to their ADP, who are you liking? Who are you not liking? All that jazz.
I mean, I guess I'd clump everybody who I'm not liking together as far as where they're going. I'm not Aaron Rodgers ADP is around the 80, 81, somewhere around there. I say somewhere around there. I know exactly where it's at. I can read it. But that's as my lackadaisical approach towards him. I'm just not as big on Rodgers this year going forward. It's not that I'm not a fan of what he can be. It's a fan of what I see the Packers being. And I see that much more run-centric. I believe that they've progressed more towards the ground game than they are in the air. I mean, his air yards have gone down consecutively each year. His touchdown percentages going down each year. The interception percentage is actually getting better. So from like a Scott Fishbowl type format, Aaron Rodgers is a great pick. Aaron has him, I know, and he'll be happy to see that. But overall, I'll pass it where he's currently going. The same thing goes for Kirk Cousins. Again, accuracy, if it was a real quarterback as far as the completion percentage, lack of interceptions, game management, and can run the ball effectively as far as the offense goes. Give me Aaron Rodgers, give me Kirk Cousins. I don't think I need to say anything about Nick Foles or Mitch Trubisky, correct?
Nope, no, you don't. Not draftable.
If you are in a streamable scenario and Mitchell Trubisky gets the ball somehow week 1 or week 7 or whatever it is against Detroit, go ahead and start him. He's averaging about 3.2 touchdowns per game against them. He owns Detroit, but then again, so does everybody else because Detroit is garbage. 32nd in the league in pass defense last year. Overall rankings terrible. And when you use that poor defense, the one thing that it can do is it can help build up the offensive side because everybody's scoring against them. Therefore, they have to play catch up. And that leads me to Matthew Stafford. Matthew Stafford, who last year, as we know, missed 8 games to a transverse process fracture. For the non-medically inclined out there, transverse process is what comes off the side of the vertebral body. And it's not as dramatic as it sounds when you say they broke his back. It's not good. I don't recommend it for anybody, but it's there. So where was Matt Stafford at through 8 games last year? He was setting career highs in touchdown percentage, setting career highs in yards per attempt, and quarterback rating. He had 2,499 yards and 19 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, pacing a potentially career year. We flashback to 2011 when he was coming off of his last time that he missed due to injury, which, by the way, in between those, he had the NFL records for the most consecutive starts too. So any concern with him being injury prone, I think can be thrown out. Looking at this year, again, like I said, poor defense, great position, ADP of 116 right now. He's the quarterback number 14 being taken. He's going after Baker Mayfield, Daniel Jones, who, if you listen to our podcast, know that I'm pretty high on Daniel Jones. I'm not as high on Daniel Jones as I am on Matthew Stafford and the aforementioned Aaron Rodgers. The change from Jim Bob Cooter, which I think is my favorite name,
Jim Bob Cooter, yep,
to Darrell Bevels is probably improving because, like I mentioned, Stafford had a potential career on the pacing. It was great. I don't know, you guys, your opinions on Matthew Stafford. Am I too heavy, too high?
I am taking him wherever I can in drafts. My strategy this year, and Todd, I think you share a similar philosophy. Is we're big running backs people. We like going running back heavy early and know we can get that depth at wide receiver down the road and build up. If we're in an IDP league, build up your defensive linemen first, and then go get your linebackers and defensive backs. And then I start looking for quarterbacks and tight ends. That's just my MO. That's Jorge's strategy. So that being said, that target that I'm looking at is Matthew Stafford. You said it yourself. Was setting career marks under Darrell Bevell last year. Unfortunate back accident. But he was on pace to be the highest scoring fantasy points per game quarterback behind Lamar Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's ridiculous what he was able to do, and now he's coming back again this year. He still has the same weapons. They drafted DeAndre Swift out of Georgia for the running back position to get balls out of the backfield. Kerryon Johnson's coming back, and his dual threat ability. It's a lot of options, a lot of weapons for Matthew Stafford. I'm very excited to draft him. What about you, Todd?
Yeah, I mean, all SEC backfield with Kerryon and Swift. I love Stafford, but one thing I wanted to mention about Aaron Rodgers, though, is last season he finished outside the top 20 quarterbacks in 8 weeks. So that was one guy I've been staying away from, and that's mainly just a stat that I go to when I hear people talk about Aaron Rodgers. That's I just wanted to throw Aaron Rodgers in there. I'm all for I go quarterback late. Stafford's one of those guys that I try to get my hands on. So, yeah, definitely his receiving core is unbelievable. So, and I mean, career year last year. So,
like we said earlier,
we're on track for one.
It's weird that you can ever find a quarterback improve just marginally in average depth of target. His went up by 4 yards.
That's ridiculous.
For people that don't necessarily read too deep into that, assume that an increase of 1.5 to 2 yards is pretty substantial. 4 is crazy, and the catch rate was still high. Completion percentage was still high. So, I mean, the sky's the limit. It wouldn't shock me to see him finish in the top 4 or 5 overall.
No, absolutely. Like ever since that week 1 performance against Arizona last year, he was just tearing it up. Definitely a good value at his ADP. Go after Matt Stafford, best quarterback option. I never thought the day would come before we transition to our next position. I never thought the day would come where people from a fantasy perspective would be clamoring for the days of Mike McCarthy as the head coach of the Green Bay Packers for Aaron Rodgers' fantasy value. It just goes to show, like, just because it's not a good football match in real life doesn't mean it can't be a good one in fantasy. That's just my little take right there. All right, let's head over to running backs now in the NFC North. And look, the first two kind of, some would say that they're not worth talking about, but I'm going to find reasons to talk about them. The first one I'm going to go after, since we're talking about Green Bay, is Aaron Jones. Led the league, or was tied for the league lead in touchdowns with 16. He had over 1,000 yards rushing, 68 targets, which was the RB11. He was RB8 in receiving yards. Fun stat, he was the RB6 in carries within the 5-yard line. Now, you would have thought having Jamal Williams back there would kind of take away from those goal-to-go situations. But no, he was actually somebody who was fairly prominently featured in that role. And now he's going behind people in terms of ADP. I'm using Fantasy Pros half PPR, 12-team ADP. He's going behind, in terms of running backs closest to him, Josh Jacobs and Joe Mixon. I don't agree with that. He's going ahead of people like Kenyon Drake, Miles Sanders, and Austin Eckler. This whole thing, putting Aaron Jones behind Josh Jacobs and Joe Mixon, I get it. Jamal Williams is still there. They drafted A.J. Dillon. Yes, Fantasy Go, David from Fantasy Go NFL. Follow him at Fantasy Go NFL on Twitter. Aaron Jones' consistency scares me. He wasn't that inconsistent. I mean, he had a few games at inopportune times, I'll grant you, where he wasn't so stellar. But he was pretty consistent across the board in terms of double-digit fantasy points. He was averaging 18.1 fantasy points per game, which was the RB4 and half PPR scoring. Most importantly, I'm not worried about them running him into the ground because they have Jamal Williams, because they drafted A.J. Dillon. They can spell him. Somebody like Josh Jacobs, however, in Las Vegas, I didn't say Oakland, in Las Vegas, you have John Gruden, who's notorious for running backs in the ground. You saw that kind of happen with Josh Jacobs last year, where he had that broken shoulder, I believe, or broken back towards the end of the season. Already started to see some wear and tear. As far as Joe Mixon is concerned, look, you guys, I don't know if everyone out there knows, but you guys right now, Nate and Todd, you know I love Joe Mixon.
Mhm.
You know I like his talent. But he's running behind the 31st ranked run blocking unit in the NFL. Aaron Jones is running behind the 6th ranked run blocking unit in the NFL, according to Pro Football Focus. I kind of feel like Aaron Jones is being slightly disrespected where he's being taken. That being said, I'm pulling strings here because he's still a first-round pick. But that's just my little take right there. Now, somebody who I think is definitely being disrespected is Dalvin Cook. RB2 in fantasy points per game with 19, was the RB1 in carries from within the 5-yard line. Like there is like no question that the Gary Kubiak's offense is going to be featuring Dalvin Cook this year. You know, he had 13 touchdowns. He was the RB6 in receiving yards, RB4 in evaded tackles. Like, look, I don't need to go any further into this other than the fact is when it comes to players that he is behind, okay, Christian McCaffrey, you know, consensus overall number 1. Fine, I get it. Saquon, sure, but I wasn't too thrilled with his performance last year. Maybe that's because I'm a jaded Saquon Barkley manager who got screwed over a few weeks of the season because he got injured. You have Zeke. Then you have Alvin Kamara. When I was looking at Alvin Kamara's advanced metrics, he didn't come even close to matching what Dalvin Cook did last year. And why so therefore, why is all this hate all this hate for Dalvin Cook? Because he's injury prone? Okay, sure. Yes, that's a valid argument. We can't bank on that every year, as much as we make jokes about it, which is horrible to say. But you know, if we're taking somebody who's somebody who's healthy and putting them on a level playing field, I think I would take a Dalvin Cook over an Alvin Kamara just because of the volume, just because of the offensive scheme that they're running in Minnesota versus New Orleans. Your thoughts, Nate, on Dalvin Cook real quick? I saw you nodding your head a little bit.
Well, you said one key thing also is something on the field. Well, if he's hurt or holding out, which I know where there's smoke, there's fire, and there's not been a lot of smoke, so probably not a lot of fire. But then again, I haven't heard anything positively I feel like he's due to wanting to play. And so, you know, injury is obviously a big check mark concern. Holdout is obviously a second one. I love Dalvin Cook for where he's going. There's very few backs in the league that are as good per game on the field. Problem is those last 3 words on the field might be the reason for pause, and you can't afford to lose your first round pick for something. I've learned that the hard way. Lev Bell scenario. Todd.
Yeah, basically all the same thoughts. I mean, he did play 14 games last year, but
which was a step up from what he did.
Yeah, big step up, but
now,
can he do it again?
Aaron, he's on our live chat right now, and he's saying 81 catches every year for Alvin Kamara. I get that, but you can't ignore the rushing volume, and you can't ignore the fact that this offense in Minnesota is predicated on funneling the ball to the running back. And yes, I know Alexander Madison is there, but let's be honest, as long as Dalvin Cook is healthy, he's going to get the bulk of that offense. They reduced the receiving options by getting rid of Stephon Diggs. You can tell that they're shifting towards a primarily run-heavy offense. I'm telling you, like, just the volume alone on the ground makes me feel like Dalvin Cook should be ranked a little bit higher in terms of ADP. But again, pulling strings, we're talking about running backs that are in the top 5. I mean, you get one of those, you're going to be, all right.
Are you actually, if where Alexander Madison's going, maybe this is where you're getting ready to touch on, so I'm sorry if I interrupted you, but at his current ADP, are you investing? I mean, there's a lot of positives about him. I think that the last person Alexander Madison's not an unknown, but Gary Kubiak made Arian Foster a household name. Not that he can't do the same thing with someone like maybe a Mike Boone, but at 96, if he's there, even if you're not a Dalvin Cook owner, let's put it that way.
Right. So Alexander Madison is currently the RB 44. He's going around. He's ranked around running backs like Tevin Coleman, Latavius Murray. I would take a gamble on Madison at that. Looking at those running back options, one running back that's near him, however, Tarek Cohen, I would probably take over Alexander Madison just because of the reception upside in Chicago there. But I don't see where he's going as a bad option. That being said, and especially with this potential contract holdout, which I think will get resolved. But we thought that about Le'Veon Bell a few years ago, and he missed the entire season. So that notwithstanding, I'm fine where he's at. But let's shift to now another running back in the division, David Montgomery. Now, Aaron, I know you're listening out there. Fantasy Triage, follow him at Fantasy Triage. You wrote a little article about David Montgomery. You gave us your thoughts. Your title of the article was "Does David Montgomery Stink?" ? I think that should kind of tell you all you need to know as far as David Montgomery is concerned. The RB 32 in fantasy points per game with 9.9 fantasy points per game. He was RB 17 with rushing touchdowns with 6, RB 18 in rushing yards with 889, RB 21 in yards after contact. There is only one statistic that gives me some glimmer of hope of David Montgomery, who, by the way, I will not be drafting in any of my drafts. So maybe that's skewing my analysis right now. The only thing that you can take away from David Montgomery was that he was the RB3 out of every running back in the NFL with carries within the 5-yard line.
Mm-hmm.
They're giving him the ball in scoring position. It's not working. Whatever it is, whatever's going on there, it's not working. It's completely frustrating. Nate?
Yeah, I from, when we had this discussion about a running back, what makes one perfect, or at least is sometimes scenario or scheme over ability. And he has the scheme. I don't see Cohen taking all the carries away from him, but yeah, I mean, your top 20 in red zone touches, your top 25 and half point PPR per, and I don't know. I'm getting off on a tangent because I want to say he could be good, but efficiently speaking, he was garbage. And so the two you're either going to hope for the best. And right now the ADP is not, it bakes in that. You find me another person in that area, and I guarantee, without even looking it up, that his touches will outproduce by, 5 or 6 per game over the next closest person around him.
Okay, so let me piggyback off of that. Players that are behind him in ADP. Okay, Jonathan Taylor, rookie running back, Indianapolis Colts.
Mm-hmm.
David Johnson,
mm-hmm.
Houston Texans. Devin Singletary, Buffalo. Okay, he is ahead of running backs like Raheem Mostert.
Mm-hmm.
He is ahead of Kareem Hunt. He is ahead of Phillip Lindsay. He is ahead of James White. Now, when I'm looking at running backs in half PPR and PPR upside, all these running backs who he's ahead of, I would rather have over him. I don't know about you guys. What are your thoughts? Todd, do you have any?
What about Tariq Cohen? I probably think Tariq Cohen probably outscores David Montgomery this season. In PPR, at least.
In full PPR. Half point, I don't think so. Full point.
And half point, I would get, I would say in half point PPR, Tariq Cohen was, I think, RB13 in 2018. Last season, every running back that had over 50 catches finished inside the top 25 except for Tariq Cohen. And Tariq Cohen saw almost the same exact touches that he saw in 2018. The offense just did nothing. So I'm kind of up for Tariq Cohen being top 25, even in half-point PPR.
Aaron is trying to make his case on Periscope right now for David Montgomery. But anyhow, last but not least, let's get into the Detroit Lions running game situation. Kerryon Johnson for the season averaged 10 fantasy points per game flat, was the RB31. When healthy, before he had his knee injury, I think it was, he was averaging 12.3 fantasy points per game. So nothing spectacular in terms of that. He was ahead of players in terms of ADP, like Matt Breida, who I'd rather have over Kerryon Johnson. Phillip Lindsay, James White, Jordan Howard, again, Tariq Cohen, another name. Tariq Cohen, we've been saying that name over and over and over again. Somebody you should probably keep an eye out when you're doing your drafts this year. I am not seeing anything spectacular from Kerryon Johnson. You want to talk about injury prone, like you were saying about Dalvin Cook. Well, this is just in terms of cost, a cheaper version of Dalvin Cook that you just want to stay away from. And they brought in Swift from Georgia to compete there. They're looking like Swift's going to take over that backfield. No, I don't see a reason why I would take Kerryon Johnson, even if it was for depth. I'd rather invest in another position. Todd, your thoughts?
So, We already talked about it earlier with Stafford throwing the ball. I mean, Stafford's going to be throwing the ball a lot. So I really don't want to mess with that running back situation at all.
No.
And Nate?
No. Game script will even dictate they'll be passing way too heavy. And I want to go ahead and put Todd on the spot right now. Aaron's willing to make a bet. I don't believe it is for any type of monetary, maybe just a pride, ego, or it could be for money. I don't care.
A pelting with tomatoes.
Pelting with tomatoes.
Yeah.
Todd, do you accept his bet? Half-point PPR, David Montgomery outscores Tariq Cohen. Assuming, I'm going to throw a caveat in there without asking Aaron's permission.
Games.
That I'm going to say the COVID compliance type bet. I don't know what number you guys want to put it at. Equal number of games, more than 12. I'll let you guys decide that.
I'm a Cohen truther, so I'll take him up on that. We'll have to.
There we go. You heard it, the fantasy triage. He is taking
Cohen over Montgomery.
Boom, and half PPR. All right, that's the bet. We'll come back to that on Fourth and Frames as the season carries on. That's, again, our fantasy football podcast. All right, that wraps up quarterbacks. That wraps up running backs. Todd, let's talk about wide receivers in the division and compare them to the ADP values.
All right, well, I'll go ahead and start with the Minnesota Vikings. Adam Thielen, I do like, but at his ADP, he's going as ADP 27. I used a fantasy football calculator for half-point PPR, 12 team. I mean, there's just so many wide receivers. Wide receiver depth is crazy. At that point in the draft, I'm just not taking them. I mean, later on in the draft, you can get Cooper Kupp, Allen Robinson, who I'm about to touch on, T.Y. Hilton, DJ Moore. You can get a lot of guys way later on in the draft. I do want to kind of touch on Justin Jefferson, though.
Okay.
The Vikings last season were one of the worst teams in the league as far as slot production. They didn't have a player go over 175 yards from the slot at all. I mean, Adam Thielen is there. He can play the slot. In 2018, he was outstanding from the slot, had 68 catches, 72 yards, or 712 yards, and 7 touchdowns. But they don't really have anybody to play outside, so when they struggled that much from the slot last season, what they go out and do in the draft, they went out and got the nation's best slot receiver. 17 of 18 of Justin Jefferson's touchdowns last season came from the slot. He had 100 slot catches last season, which led NCAA. They went out and got him for a reason, so I think he plays a bigger role. I personally think Thielen moves outside for him, and Jefferson moves into the slot. I've seen other people mention that too, but I think Justin Jefferson definitely has some upside. Especially Adam Thielen has some injury history too, so who knows if he can actually stay on the field.
No, that's a very good point. And they get rid of Stephon Diggs, they ship him off to Buffalo, and now you have defenses keying on Thielen, which opens up the middle of the field. Kyle Rudolph, he's not a dependable receiving option except for weeks 14, 15, and 16, which is good for you in the fantasy playoffs, but not good for you to help you get to the fantasy playoffs. Now that's a very good insight. Jefferson, awesome. Who else you got there?
Yeah, and you mentioned Diggs going over to Buffalo. That opens up about 90 targets for Jefferson to consume. Yep. But I'll go on. I mentioned Allen Robinson a minute ago, so we'll hit the Bears. I don't have much to say about Allen Robinson. I've been drafting him in the 4th round of almost every one of my drafts. Half-point PPR last year, wide receiver 11, 154 targets, just under 100 catches. He had 7 touchdowns, over 1,100 yards. Now he doesn't have Mitch Trubisky throwing to him. I expect Nick Foles to win the job. And, Trubisky, we've all seen the memes and everything. Trubisky can't hit an open wide receiver. So I think it's a little bit of a quarterback upgrade. Really, I want to talk about Anthony Miller. Mm-hmm. That's a player I absolutely love. He has an ADP of 134, so you can get him pretty late. And last season, from week 8 on, from the slot, he was top 5 in targets, receptions, and yards. Oh, wow. Really broke onto the scene in the second half of the season. He led the Bears last season with 363 slot yards. And so I was looking at like really what changed for the Bears last season for Anthony Miller to come onto the season. Their top 2 slot options, Allen Robinson was the number 2 slot option for them last season. And weeks 1 to 8, they ran only 246 snaps from the slot. Weeks 9 to 17, 125 more basically. They ran 376 slot snaps, so they used the slot a bunch more. So
they're onto something.
It's something to look at. If they continue to do that early on in the season, Anthony Miller could have a huge impact on fantasy teams.
Nice. What about in Green Bay?
Green Bay, really got one of the number 1 wide receivers in football, Devontae Adams. Kind of had a down year last year. Didn't even have 1,000 yards.
Well, he got hurt with the turf toe. So
yeah, I was looking at it. Him and Crowder were the only 2 players that had 120 more targets and didn't hit 1,000 yards.
Wow.
So, I mean, I think he's absolutely going to get so many targets in Green Bay. Personally, I'm not really messing with any of the wide receiver 2s in Green Bay, whether it's Funch or Lazard. What are your takes on Green Bay's seconds? Because I'm really not messing with any of those guys.
Jorge he touched on their wide receiver number 2. That's Aaron Jones.
Aaron Jones.
Yeah, he did.
He was second on the league and second on the team in targets last year. I don't see any reason why. I mean, any of the other aforementioned guys are going to come in to take enough targets away. Like you said, Jimmy Graham vacated 60 targets alone. Then you throw in someone. I mean, I don't know if Jamal Williams will still get 45 targets or not, but I do. I think Aaron Jones is my wide receiver 2 there.
Yeah, that's actually a very good point. I really like that take. Yeah, Aaron Jones, wide receiver 2, basically in Green Bay.
Nice. So I have a question for you. Switching over to Detroit real quick. Danny Amendola. He had, I believe, a few games when Stafford was there with over 100 yards receiving and close to double-digit targets. What are your thoughts on Danny Amendola out of the slot in Detroit?
Yeah. Well, out the slot, he has no competition at all. He ran 300. Just almost 350 slot snaps last season. No other Lions receiver had over 175. So he's going to be the man in the slot for them. As far as what him and Stafford did last season together, they went nuts when they played together. In 3 of the 6 games, he had over 6 catches. Amendola was actually injured in 2 of Stafford's 8 games, so he only played in 6. But yeah, in 3 of those 6, he had 7 or more catches. And in 3 of those 6, he also went for 95 or more yards.
Right.
So Stafford used him a lot out of the slot. Definitely a guy you can rely on. He's got solid hands. He's been around the league forever. Stafford likes him. I like him a lot. And you can get him for super, super cheap. He wasn't even showing up on a fantasy football calculator for ADP at all.
No. Wow. And one of the things we talked about earlier is Stafford looking to go deeper downfield last year. The one thing that's going to change this year is they had an offensive line I don't want to say turnover, but their right tackle and right guard are both gone now. So when you have that potentially new acclimation, maybe he might have to get rid of the ball a little bit sooner. If that's the case, obviously Amendola from the 6 to 7 yard average up the target that he's going to have might see a target share increase for him.
Right. Yeah, and then Galladay and Marvin Jones is one of the best values in the draft. I mean, people are drafting him for what he did last season without Stafford. With Stafford, both of them were top 15 wide receivers with Stafford.
I
Yeah,
realized that Marvin Jones was top 15.
He was 12. He averaged 12.6 a game with and 12.4 without. So I mean, I don't want to say he's quarterback proof because he's stupid.
He's stupid value though.
He's stupid value.
Yeah, I was talking about Jones when I was saying Jones and Galladay were both top 15, not Amendola.
Yeah.
Okay, got you.
Yeah.
He's top 15 on the Lions. So
yeah, top 15 on the Lions. That's for sure.
All right, let's shift over quickly before we wrap up the show to tight ends. I mentioned Kyle Rudolph in weeks 14, 15, and 16. That's a good option. You got TJ Hawkinson in Detroit. We just talked about all the receiving options there, so I don't know what to make of that. Chicago, they feel like they have so many tight ends that there's not one to really talk about. other than Jimmy Graham, which, Jimmy Graham hasn't been Jimmy Graham since he left New Orleans, which that just dates you as far as how long Jimmy Graham has been in the league. And that brings us to Green Bay. And we were talking about somebody there in Green Bay that could potentially be a good option at tight end. Real deep leagues now we're talking. Somebody who you probably can still pick up off the waiver wires after your drafts are done. Mm-hmm. And he has a very familiar number for the Packers. Nate?
He does. It's like we said, it's kind of sacrilege. It's number 87, Jordy. And it's weird to see someone out there wearing the 87, but then when you see him and he's 6'4", 220, you realize that's not Jordy Nelson. But Jay Sternberger is one who, again, like I talked about earlier, with Jimmy Graham's vacated targets, and they got to go somewhere. I realize that they're going to still be more run heavy than they've been in the past, at least prior with, like you said, the McCarthy era. But they got to go somewhere, and I don't think it's MVS. I don't think it's Lazard. I'm not saying that it's going to be Sternberger, but Rodgers does have a history of liking to go, especially now that Jordy's gone, 87 in the red zone. Maybe that triggers something. Maybe he has flashbacks of just looking for 87 and he goes his direction. If that happens, you have a steal. I mean, he's basically going undrafted, except for like in certain tight end premium leagues, you could get him for next to nothing. And he's got a fun name, Sternberger.
There you go. Number 87 in your minds, number 87 in your hearts. And with that wraps up Behind the Frames, talking at the NFC North versus ADP. Todd, awesome seeing you again. Nate, awesome seeing you again. All the Four-Eyed fans out there, stay safe. Hope you're doing well. Aaron, we'll see you next time. Hope you're doing well. Take care, folks.